Well, hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is TNC in Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers and our partners from New England and around the world. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm Deb Markowitz, the State Director of the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, and I'm your host today. So for those of you who may not already know, here at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, we're dedicated to creating a healthier world for everybody. We work locally and globally using innovative science and scalable, long-lasting solutions to tackle the most complex environmental challenges facing our warming planet. And we know that what we do here in Massachusetts to protect nature will mean a better future for people and the whole world. We have an exciting program for you today. We're going to be chatting with TNC in Massachusetts' new climate adaptation scientist, Emma Gildesgame. Emma will chat about her background and why she came to TNC. We feel so lucky to have her, as well as some of her priority projects, which include creating cleaner water in Barnstable, restoring the Belle Isle salt marsh, and building climate resilience and expanding community access to nature in the lower Mystic River watershed. Before we actually start our program and dive in, I wanted to share a little bit about our guest. Emma is the climate adaptation scientist for the Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy. She works with communities and stakeholders to co-develop and implement equitable nature-based solutions that provide multiple benefits to nature and people at a pace and scale that matches the urgency of climate change. So there's a couple things going on. We want to get things done fast, but we also want to do it right. We want to make sure that communities and stakeholders are engaged and are helping to co-create the solutions, because we know if we don't get that right, then it won't be a long-lasting solution. She earned her Master's of Environmental Management and Water Resources Science and Management from the Yale School of Environment. She has a Bachelor's of Arts in Environmental Science from Colby College. Her graduate work focused on planning for urban coastal climate resilience. And before joining TNC in November, Emma worked on water quality planning and restoration, nutrient pollution, and estuaries projects for NUEPIC, a regional commission that helps the states of the Northeast preserve and advance water quality. She's also worked on wetland restoration, climate communication, watershed and marine education, outdoor recreation, and she's worked with organizations across New England, Colorado, and California. Emma lives in Somerville, Massachusetts, but can also frequently be found in Western Maine or the White Mountains. And wherever she is, you can find her wandering in the woods with and the mountains, kayaking, skiing, or baking cookies. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions of Emma. When you have a question, please enter it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So I want to thank you all again for joining us, and let's dive in. Emma, welcome.
Thank you, Deb. Let me just get my screen shared, and then we'll get started. Great. How's that look?
Looks great.
Awesome. So I'm really happy to be talking with you today. I'm so thrilled to be part of the Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy. As Deb mentioned, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my path to TNC, and then I'll dive into my projects, and then I look forward to hearing your questions and thoughts. So as Deb mentioned, the really easy way to tell my story is I've always loved nature and animals. A career in conservation is a perfect fit for what I love to do. I studied environmental science in large part because lab meant go sit in a canoe and catch turtles and measure them. And then eventually I went and got a master's in environmental management, and I focused on watershed management, I focused on climate resilience, which brought me to TNC. But the more interesting story, and the story that is really an important part of my approach to the work and why I'm so excited to be part of TNC, is a much wigglier, windier path. So as Deb mentioned, I spent a long time between undergrad and grad school working with people in nature. So I worked for the Appalachian Mountain Club's High Mountain Hut system. I taught skiing in Colorado. I worked on wildlife education and salt marsh restoration projects in California. And I spent a bunch of years working for an aquarium in California doing public education and school education and outreach. And the common thread for all of these jobs was connecting people and nature and helping everybody understand how we're all part of the same system and we all rely on each other. And so when eventually it was time to go to grad school, my plan was to build my technical skills for watershed management and restoration. I thought that I wanted to be out in the salt marsh doing that work to do restoration. And while I love that, and I got those technical skills, I also found that I love and I'm really fascinated by the planning and the project management pieces. So what does it actually take to make change happen on the ground? How do you bring the right people to the table? How do you help figure out the shared goals and work towards them? And it turns out that a lot of those same communications and engagement skills that I worked on in classrooms with kids and out on the pier in San Francisco talking about sea lions are the same skills that you need when you're trying to get projects happening on the ground. So it's connecting with people, it's understanding where they're coming from and finding shared values and common goals. And so since grad school, in my work at NUIPIC and in my work now at TNC, it's all about putting the pieces of the puzzle together. It's working to combine science and policy and engagement and planning to work towards more functional ecosystems that work for people and nature. So this is that kind of mission statement for my job that Deb mentioned before. And this was the hook that when I saw this on the job description, I was like, oh, yep, that's what I want to be my next job. I get to play a bunch of different roles for different projects, and it's all with the goal of showing up and saying, how can I help get these projects on the ground to use nature to provide benefits for all of us? And how do we do it quickly and right? And so sometimes that means playing a technical role and bringing the science expertise and lessons from similar projects, or sometimes only peripherally related projects across the TNC network to help inform projects on the ground, and then turn back around and say, here's what we learned from this project. Let's help others learn from our lessons as well. And there's other times where I'm bringing capacity to help manage projects and build really sustainable partnerships that can continue to get work done. With one of my partners, we joke that we are not just herding the cats, but we're trying to train the cats to herd themselves to get everybody on the same page and stay there. And when it comes to all of these projects, nature-based solutions are really at the core. And so let's just take a second to talk about what a nature-based solution is. They are a huge, huge category of projects and solutions that use nature and natural systems and processes to solve problems in ways that benefit both people and the environment. So sometimes this looks like protecting existing natural systems like salt marshes that protect against storm surges and flooding. Other times, it looks like restoring natural functions to really degraded ecosystems. And this can help provide access to green space, provide habitat, it can filter pollution. There's a whole bunch of different benefits from restoring systems. And there's times where nature-based solutions look really deeply engineered. So it's like rain gardens and green infrastructure projects that help manage stormwater flows. And so there's a huge range of different nature-based solutions, and each one has a whole suite of goals that they can help meet. And so they can be climate adaptation, it can be public health, it can be cost-effective solutions over traditional infrastructure. It can be habitat, the list goes on forever. So all of my projects have something to do with nature-based solutions in some way or another. And so we're gonna start on the Cape, where, as you might know, the Cape struggles with nitrogen pollution. So nitrogen is a really essential nutrient, but when you have too much of it, just like adding too much of a good thing in any other context, it throws off the balance and you end up with pretty gross algal blooms that can also be really, really hazardous to wildlife, to people, to pets. And on the Cape and in other coastal communities, a lot of this pollution comes from traditional septic tanks. And so traditional septic tanks were really designed with a focus of removing pathogens, so bacteria and viruses, to help prevent people from getting sick from the water. But because they don't focus on nutrients, they end up being a major contributor to nutrient loading, which causes these harmful algae blooms. It can facilitate species invasion. It can cause a whole fun suite of problems. And so to address this problem, many towns on the Cape have developed sewering plans to get as many of their homes as possible on municipal wastewater treatment, so big centralized systems. This might take decades, 30 years or more, and many millions or even billions of dollars. And so that's an important part of the solution, but we also need other solutions sooner and for places where sewering doesn't really make sense. So one of the ways that, going back a little bit. feel a little sneak preview of what's coming next. So one of the ways we're addressing this is by working with partners to install and test systems called innovative and alternative septic systems. And so these remove way more nitrogen than traditional systems, and they do it using pretty natural processes. So there's a bunch of these different systems, but none of them are out there in kind of a big enough number that we can say these are the norm or these are heading towards the norm. And so one of our goals is figure out what does it look like for these innovative and alternative systems to become just the new baseline. And what they do is they take nitrogen and other nutrients from the water, and they bind nutrients like phosphorus, and then they also turn nitrogen dissolved in the water into atmospheric nitrogen. So the air that you're breathing is mostly nitrogen. And so adding more nitrogen to the air is a much better place for it than adding it to the water. And so then you can add this system in between your traditional septic tank and your traditional septic leach field and address a huge amount of the nitrogen coming out of there. And so these are really promising, but there's a lot of work to do to get them from this really promising technology to something that is normal and mainstream and part of the solution everywhere. And so we're working with the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition and EPA and the state of Massachusetts and the town of Barnstable and NUIA, which is an association of water professionals, and a whole bunch of other partners to prove which of these systems work most effectively, help get them through the state of Massachusetts approval process, the ones that work effectively, and really importantly, working with partners to identify and remove barriers to adoption. So I participated last week before, in a workshop with people from across the IA septic world in Massachusetts to identify these barriers and start visioning what the future looks like. So this might look like helping figure out organized maintenance schemes, because these don't work if they're not being maintained. And so what does this look like to support homeowners and communities in keeping these things maintained? Importantly, figuring out how to fund them and get them into the ground at a way that's not putting the burden on the homeowners. And so we're working on all of these things. Stay tuned for updates. And the really important thing is that the goal isn't just to solve this problem in Barnstable. It's to develop transferable solutions that can inform how we address this really common problem on a larger scale. And so one of the ways we're doing that is I'm just getting started working with the Southeast New England program, which is an EPA program, to provide technical assistance to the town of Mashpee and the Mappy-Wampanoag tribe to address their nutrient pollution issues right next door to Barnstable. This is Santuit Pond, which is where we're focusing and where they are dealing with many, many harmful and toxic algae blooms. And so septic systems are part of the solution and they're a big part of the problem, so they have to be a big part of the solution. But we also get to play with wetlands, which is one of my favorite places to play. So in Barnstable, we're working with the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition and the EPA Southeast New England program to acquire and restore more than half of a 100-acre complex of cranberry bogs that are the site of former wetlands. So cranberry bogs are wetlands, but they're not ecologically functional ones. They have all sorts of drainage and barriers so that you can use them to harvest wetlands. Use them to harvest cranberries. But as cranberry farming becomes less lucrative in Massachusetts, we have an opportunity to restore these bogs into more functional wetlands that can help capture nutrients, help slow down the flow of the river to help the river really absorb nutrients as it flows before it reaches the estuary, which is also facing nitrogen problems. And we'll also be hopefully able to build in flood resilience and carbon sequestration and public access into these restored wetlands. And so this is going to be a really exciting part of the solution. And we're going to work with our partners to make sure that the lessons from this project are expanded so that we can inform other projects all over the state and beyond. And so we're also exploring opportunities for other types of green infrastructure like rain gardens to help slow down and treat stormwater, especially since climate change is already bringing more of our rainfall in more intense storm events. And we're not just working on the Cape. I'm really excited to be working in my own backyard. One of my pet peeves is the perception that to protect nature and people, you like put nature all the way over here and people all the way over there and keep them very far apart. And we know better than that. We know that bringing people and nature together can help solve so many problems. And so that's what I'm focusing on in some of the most densely populated parts of Greater Boston. So if you look at this possibly familiar to many of you, satellite image of the greater Boston area. I want you to take a look over here at this big expanse of green. For some size context, here's the Boston Public Garden and Boston Common. So this over here is Belle Isle Marsh. If you haven't been down there, highly recommend. This is Suffolk Downs. The blue line goes right here. And we're working with a ton of partners to identify restoration opportunities and community engagement strategies to find ways for Belle Isle to adapt to climate change while protecting the surrounding communities from climate impact. So this is going to be really tricky. Sea level rise is making the problem worse. Existing flow barriers and kind of the fact that this is completely surrounded by really dense development and communities. And the truth that this marsh has nowhere to go. There's nowhere for this marsh to migrate. Mean that there's a lot of challenges here, but we're doing our best to figure out how to help the marsh survive, what restoration is possible, and provide benefits to the surrounding communities and also to the really cool bird populations that are there. It's a really important bird area. As you can imagine, if you were a bird flying in looking at this, this is where I'd want to go. So Belle Isle has a lot of incredible work. I'm also working with our Northeastern TNC postdoc, Jocelyn Alamu, who you may hear from at some point in the future. But we're also working on a tributary of a tributary to the lower Mystic River. So here's the Mystic. You go up Mystic, and you go up Chelsea Creek, surrounded by oil take farms and industrial areas and communities. And then you take a sharp left up Mill Creek. And that's where we're going to focus on for the rest of the time that I'm talking. So here's Mill Creek. And I love that you can see the natural systems happening in the creek, even just from Google Earth. So here's Chelsea, here's Revere. This creek is tidal. So these marshes up here are salt marshes, but you can also see what's happening to the flow of water and sediment as you go up the creek. So here's the MBTA bridge, and you can see this pile of sediment building up at the bottom and just how narrow the creek gets. And then you get up here to the Slade Spice Mill berm. It used to be a dam, it's a berm now, which is a big pile of dirt. And then you keep going further up the creek and you get to these wetlands. But because of all these constrictions, the water slows down, all the sediments and rocks and debris drop out, and it clogs up the creek even more. And that's putting a lot of stress on these wetlands, which are salt marshes, but they're not getting as much salt as they really need to be healthy because they're not getting that much flow. And that means that they're not able to do their job and provide all of the benefits that a healthy salt marsh can have for the surrounding communities. And so we're working with Mystic River Watershed Association and a ton of other partners to figure out how do we restore this creek to be a more functional ecosystem that also provides access for these surrounding communities that don't have a ton of access to nature or to the coast in their own community. So this is an MBTA bridge. The commuter rail goes over this, and we're working with the T to say, okay, you have to replace this bridge anyway. It's on their list of planned maintenance. What would it look like to do this more resiliently? What would it look like if the bridge that replaces this is more open and allows more flow? We're looking at opportunities to fund the removal of this berm, which is the next big impoundment and the next big barrier to flow. And we're working with Green Roots, which is a environmental justice organization based in Chelsea. And they've already put in a river walk here. And so the hope is that eventually there'll be a river walk that connects all the way here and brings you even closer to the city of Boston. So kind of a big, long public access parkway along the side here. Way down the line, but I love this idea. Right here is one piece of that puzzle. So this is 88 Clinton Street. The city of Chelsea is in the process of acquiring it. And this is going to be a park that provides access to nature and the waterfront to the people of Chelsea. A lot of the other parks in Chelsea are sports fields and playgrounds and other really important parks, but there isn't one that provides access to the waterfront and nature. So we're still in the early process here. It's right now just an open lot. But the idea is that it'll have nature-based solutions like stormwater management and places for people to picnic and hopefully bird watch and do all sorts of other things in this park, and then connect it up to the Riverwalk as well. Now, you might be looking at this as I talk about how there isn't that much access to the coast and to nature. And then you might be looking at this big green thing and saying, well, what's that? That looks like this. If you look at the street view, you can see it's cut off. The Google Street View car can't get there, but I highly recommend actually dropping the little Street View dude into the creek and looking around 360. So this is the edge of this kind of development. It's all abandoned industrial buildings. They're all broken windows and no public access at all. This is actually the city of Boston. You can see, you may have seen this wind turbine from Route 1. It's never spinning because it didn't have the right permits, so it's not working. But it's kind of a vacant lot. It is. And the city of Chelsea is trying to figure out how to acquire the site. And we're there to help, because even though it's a kind of industrial site, there's a lot of contamination, there's a lot of concrete and old legacy development there. There's also marsh, and there's a bunch of birds, and there's a bunch of plants and trees and things that when I've been there, it's been January, but you can imagine this as beautiful and lush and potentially a great nature-based solution when it's not January, also in January. But there's a ton of partners who are on board to help transform this into something that can provide climate resilience and outdoor access and nature-based education and some ecosystem function in the heart of this otherwise super developed area. And so right now it's cut off, but in the future, we see this as being part of the city and bringing people in. And so my job as part of this project is to jump in with knowledge and capacity and resources to help shape the next phase of this park. And I'm so excited. It might take years and years and years, but I love the idea of being able to turn this site that's not really serving anybody right now into a climate resilient public access space for the community and the surrounding communities. So that was a lot. I look forward to chatting with all of you. And so please reach out if you have questions or thoughts. And yeah, thank you so much.
That was really, really wonderful, Emma. Thank you so much for that overview of yourself, of course, but also the work you're doing. I find, you ended with this Chelsea project. It's so aspirational and inspirational. And I like that you said it may take a long time to accomplish, but you already have in mind your legacy. And that's what we love to see in employees, right? You inherit a bunch of existing projects, but you're also looking out there for impact. And I know for me, one of the reasons I love working at the Nature Conservancy is, I like you come from a Jewish background, and I think about what's my purpose on earth, and it's tikkun olam, to heal the rifts in the world, to heal the planet. And at TNC, we get to do this and really have long-lasting impacts. And what I think is so inspiring about you and your work is you recognize we're only going to be successful if we do this in partnership. Science is important, but we also need community. And unless we're also thinking and integrating the communities that are directly impacted, we're not going to get it right or even necessarily be successful. So I want to applaud you for at this stage in your career already having that dialed in, because I have to say a lot of people my age took a long time to come to that. We can't just come in and we're the experts. We're going to tell you how to do it right.
I mean, going from the it's a very Jewish thing to start from a question. You got to walk in and start with a question, right? Yeah. You can't just walk in and be like, hello, I know things. You have to walk in and be like, well, what do you need? What are the goals here? How do we move forward with this? And you always have to start with a question. And that comes from education too, right? When I was working at the aquarium, when people are, looking at the river otters, and, the first question is, what do you notice? What do you care about? Not usually phrased that way, though.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, as a scientist, you start with a question too,
right?
Yeah,
totally.
When you're figuring out what you want to study and what your thesis is, it's in a form of a question of what else do you want to know? Yeah. Very, very cool. So I am curious, because you touched on this lightly. Why the passion for this work? Where did that come from? Your passion for working with nature, besides it being fun to have lab time in a boat. I get that. I was a philosophy major and then law school, and we didn't do any boats or, walks, hikes, and, it was all books and libraries.
Yeah, I mean, I highly recommend taking class in boats. It may be hard to focus on the actual things that are being said, but class in a boat is great. But I mean, it really, I sort of mentioned it quickly. I've always been an outside kid. Like, it just kind of, it was go play outside, here's the woods. I like to joke that my career as a watershed scientist started in second grade when my dad, who is also a watershed planner and scientist, brought 2 watershed models to my Girl Scout troop. And one was impervious cover, so it had garbage bags and not a lot of mud, and you got to see what happened when you pour water on it. And then the other one was a more nature-based solutions landscape with lots of mud and dirt and rocks. And I'll let you guess which one broke all over my second grade classroom. It was the muddy one. And so that's where I first learned about impervious cover. So I've always been kind of thinking about these, like hikes with my family was, what do you notice about the trees as we go up the mountain? Oh, they get shorter. Why did they get shorter? So it's always, I've kind of always been surrounded by the environmental science, but I thought I was going to go to vet school. I wanted to be a vet. And then I had the choice of go take organic chemistry and sit in the lab forever, or go take more ecology classes and sit in a boat and catch turtles. And I was like, what if my career could be the other one? What if I could be thinking about these systems and the puzzles? And so part of it was just class choices in college, but it was also, I love thinking about the systems and the puzzles and how do you pull all these pieces together to make something work.
One of the things I've observed is that you have a rare background, like a rare skill in blending, communication and science. Your training does that too, right? I mean, you've got some background in that. So, and how do you think that gives you an advantage in this position as a scientist, as somebody working on projects in the community? And do you recommend that to people who are maybe thinking about, the environment, as a career, or who've got children or grandchildren who are thinking about environmental careers?
Absolutely, because the way to bring, it's like, we can't do this alone, right? No one person can fix the problems that we're facing and kind of work towards solutions. And so the best way to get people on board is to be able to clearly communicate it. And like, if you talk about like phenotypic diversity of Spartina and a marsh, like, yeah, sure, like that's important, but being able to say more clearly, having a diversity of different species of seagrasses or marsh grasses helps in X, Y, and Z ways, makes it far more effective. And even more importantly, if you can go from there and saying, here's how you connect to the marsh, here's why you should care about the marsh, here's why you should care that there is a marsh within Boston. And so being able to draw those lines is what allows us to bring people in. Like, we can't just have, the outdoor kids who are solving this problem. We need to help everybody be an outdoor kid for their whole, no matter, I say outdoor kid, you don't have to actually be a kid to be an outdoor kid.
Right. I appreciate that. So there was actually a comment that it was Sarah O'Neill who said, these projects are inspiring. I always find, I wish and worry that it's all too slow to meet the challenge. They could move faster, but maybe that would undermine the partnership success. Any thoughts on this? And I actually think the communication piece is really part of it. Like, we're not going to scale without having good communicators. But what do you have a response to Sarah?
I mean, it's tricky and it's a balance, and it depends on the project, which is not a super satisfying response. But, I think that if you, sorry, I was like, the questions just all popped up.
Yeah, don't look at them. I'm in charge of looking.
Oh, yeah, no, I know. I just, yeah, they all showed up.
You don't have to get distracted.
I mean, I think the thing is, if you move too fast, you leave people behind, and you miss on kind of a whole bunch of the value that you could have by bringing more people to the table. But if you don't move fast enough, you also lose people. So it's just about constantly asking those questions and being clear on the goals of, here's where we're going, come along with us. I mean, it really is all back to communication, and for every project it's different. So it's hard to like have an answer, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So it depends kind of project by project. But
yeah.
I would say, as the director of the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, I am thinking about this all this time. the tension between the urgency of action, like acting at the pace and scale that this climate emergency really requires of us, and at the same time doing it with integrity, doing it right, doing it thinking about endurance over time. And so that's exactly the right question. And we're experimenting. We're trying to figure out the right answers, I would say. And you're front and center with your kind of work on the ground.
I mean, I think that one of the really great examples of this is a project that I didn't actually really talk about in what I just went through, is we're working with a whole bunch of community-based organizations to figure out what does more equitable climate funding look like, from the state level and from everywhere. So like, what does it look like to make sure that funding for climate work is going to the communities that need it? And we had this idea of like, we're going to have this done by like January 2022. But then our community partners were saying, well, all of our community-based organization partners have a lot of year-end capacity challenges of kind of fundraising and events and all sorts of things. So like, you really can't start your outreach until later. And so it's just, it's like, oh, we hadn't thought about that when we initially made this timeline. So we're shifting our timelines and we're adapting and we're going to continue reaching out, but you got to do it on the timeline that works. And, as one of our team members talks about, is you have to work at the pace of trust. And if you don't work at the pace of trust, then you lose people behind. And so I think it's about also being open of like, hey, we are shifting this deadline because of the feedback that we've gotten. Here's what we're going to do. And it's all about back to communication. It's being clear and being effective of, here's why we're doing what we're doing. Because if you can focus on the why too, you can make sure that you're not losing sight of the ultimate goal, right? Like if you're just like, well, we're getting delayed and we're getting cut in the weeds because we have to navigate these weeds, but we still need to be able to focus on where we're going.
Yeah, that tension always there.
Always a balance.
We've got so many questions, so I'm going to start kind of trying to move us through them a little bit.
Yeah.
Austin Smith says, too often adaptation means to most of the public, how do I protect my property? Usually the house should have never been built there in the first place. Think about the National Flood Insurance Program, which creates wrong incentives often, not always, but often. Then the question is, how do we change public perception of what's important? That's a huge question. I don't know if you've got thoughts about it.
If I had a answer to that, I think anybody who has the answer to that, please publicize it broadly. But I think that it's helping us understand how we're all connected to each other. So I think it's saying, okay, well, if you build a seawall on your property, the flooding might not hit your property from the front, but if you build a seawall and not everybody does, then it can go around depending on other things, and you can make flooding worse in your neighbors. But if we use these solutions that are nature-based, and maybe start talking about not rebuilding some of those houses in the floodplain when they get flooded, which I know is a really challenging thing to think about and talk about, but it's something that is going to have to be part of the solution. And it's networking. It's figuring out, how do you help people understand how we're all connected, and how do you help people understand how the future is going to look. Like there's certain things about the future that even if we stopped emitting any greenhouse gases today, we're locked in.
Sea level rise actually is one of those things. We know,
especially in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts is going to have a lot of sea level rise no matter what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
So we've got to be ready for it.
And it's how do we tell that story without also cutting people off into fear, right? Because I think that we've all had that moment where we're like, I can't engage with any of this anymore. I am tired. I am scared. I'm going to go curl up with a really good book that has nothing to do with reality and not engage. And that's okay sometimes. Like everybody needs that moment, but we also need to really be able to come back and to get people past that fear and to say, we have solutions. There's solutions that require us to think through a little bit differently how we look at the world, but we have solutions. We can get through this, but we have to do it together, because if we just do it by ourselves, then we're not actually solving anything.
You know, our TNC's chief scientist, our head scientist at the World Office, is this really inspiring woman. If you haven't, you should Google her. Those of you out there watching, Catherine Hayhoe, she just came out with a great book. And one of the things that she says that I find so true is the antidote to that despair is action. Like, you can't just say, let's have hope. Like, you create hope through action. And that's what the Nature Conservancy does, right? It's like we are creating hope by acting and finding these solutions. And the other thing that is so cool, I think, about our work is, when you're doing a bunch of these projects, which are great and important on their own, but we never do a project for just the project's sake, right? They all stand on their own, but we're always learning from the project for information to help us scale the solution. So, for example, the work you're doing in Barnstable, which is so important with wastewater treatment facilities, or on-site septic, we're now thinking, okay, what do we do with that scientific information? How do we change the permit process? How do we embed this in EPA, like across the country, so that these solutions can be scaled? How do we go through the TNC network and use these solutions around the world? And that's key. We are always thinking about legislation, policy to scale, finance, what are the financial mechanisms and incentives to scale, and then, community of practice, like how do we create that community of practice? So, and you'll be front and center in that as the years go by.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the really cool things is there's so much happening within TNC that chances are good that if you're thinking about something, somebody else is thinking about it from a slightly different perspective. So like I was on a call with the Northeast Division, which is like Maryland-ish to Maine. And this was just yesterday, so not much has come of it yet, except for we set up a meeting. But I was talking about a project that we're working on. Somebody in Maryland was like, oh, we're also working on something that's similar. Let's talk, because both of our projects they share similar goals, but they're coming at it from different angles. There's a lot of different things that we're looking forward to learning from each other. And then New Jersey and Maine kind of popped in and said, oh, we're also thinking about how do we do that? So rather than just working in a vacuum, we're able to say, okay, well, what did you learn from your project? What are the challenges that you're facing? Oh, here's what worked for us in facing those challenges. So we're not working alone, we're working together.
That's really powerful. So little note from Maria Sadowski. Thank you so much. This is the most optimistic I've felt in a long time. Good. I appreciate the short-term plans with an eye on longer-term goals. I think that's great. Pallavi Mande says, this is a great project in the Lower Mystic. How is it that you and TNC are funding your work? Where's the funding coming from for this work?
Ooh, a whole bunch of different places. Also, hi, Pallavi. I did not mention that I got my start with the Charles River Watershed Association with Pallavi. But funding comes from a lot of different places, and that's one of the things that TNC is good at, is figuring out, okay, here's the project. Is there grant funding? Is there foundation funding? Is there donors and supporters who are excited about this work, who we can get on board to help make this happen on the ground? So we've been in lots of budgeting meetings lately. And that's the conversation is, okay, so we have all these different funding streams, and how do we put the pieces of the puzzle together to make things happen?
Mark Albert asks, how is outreach with upstream property owners and neighbors gone in the creek above the proposed removal of the berm and the MBTA bridge sediments? I understand that folks might be afraid of increased flooding with increased natural flows. And that is like always the tension, right? When we bring things back towards their natural state, other things may happen. So have you been working on this particular aspect of the problem?
So this is where I get to put on I'm still within my first couple of months, and that's a great question that I know has been a topic of conversation, but I don't believe that I have a good answer yet. But I know that one of the issues in kind of with the constriction is that sometimes the tide can't come out as fast as it wants to. So often kind of generally, and I don't have specific data on Mill Creek, but I know some of it may exist, but sometimes that removing a barrier and allowing the flow to flow more smoothly can actually alleviate some flooding concerns.
Yeah.
But then there's also sea level rise, which is going to be an issue there regardless.
Yeah, in my experience, it actually removing the barrier ultimately alleviates flooding. There is an interim period where the sediment is beginning to move and can create impact. And there was a question: why can't you just dredge the creek? And as a water scientist, that's often not a good idea. Although sometimes in a specific way to ease that transition, it could be successful, right?
It can sometimes be a short-term solution. There's often questions of what do you do with the stuff that you've dredged? And once you start dredging, you often have to keep dredging. So dredging can be a solution in some places. It's often used to remove like really nutrient-packed sediments to deal with really nutrient kind of overladen places, but dredging can often cause more problems than it solves.
Yeah, phosphorus and nitrogen are pretty heavy, and so they end up on the bottom. And so sometimes that dredging is a way to kind of get it out of a system, but it's rarely a good solution. When you deepen a channel, it actually makes the water go faster. It causes more erosion, and so then it creates more sediment downstream or upstream. I can never remember which is up and down. You're the expert. You said it's one of the ways. The way the water goes, it'll bring more sediment down and make a problem worse in that area. So then there was a follow-up question from Jane Herlacher. How will you deal with contaminated soils? Because in this industrial area, lots of contaminated soils.
That's a really good question. It's going to make the project far more expensive, always. And that's something that we will have to deal with, and we will figure out how to deal with once we deal with the questions of site control and what we're actually doing, depending on what the ultimate plans are for, say, Forbes Park. The sediment question changes based on what the actual goals of the project are.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a challenging problem.
Yeah, and it's, to be honest, for folks watching, whenever there's any development in the Boston area, in an urban area, there will be a contaminated soils problem just because of legacy use of land. And there'll be state regulations and federal regulations, and there'll be solutions set up. It just adds costs. It adds to the price tag. So, basically in dealing with, in dealing with contaminated soils, you just got to follow what the rules are. Phil Warburg asks, or says, the Cranberry Bog project is inspiring and hopeful, but what incentives exist for homeowners in Barnstable to install septic systems on their property? Are there mandated retrofits, requirements for new construction?
So that is a fantastic question. The question of incentives is one that we're talking about now. It's kind of what grant or what funding pools exist that we can help defray the additional costs. Right now, the pilot projects that we're doing, the costs are defrayed by the Barnstable Clean Water Coalition, so they are paying to get projects in the ground. There's a bunch of different partners as we're in this pilot phase who are helping get systems in the ground. But one of the long-term questions is, what are the sustainable funding mechanisms to help get these systems in the ground? There's potential for a bunch of different models. We're looking at some impact investing questions. So what does impact investing look like? If we can get these systems in the ground and they can defray the costs or reduce the cost of sewering, can we set up some sort of investment model there? So these are all really good questions that we're hoping to have answers for at some point in the near future.
And then, once we prove out the technology, the other barrier is engineers. I love engineers, but engineers have been trained in particular ways, and this is different. And, maybe they won't feel as confident about this nature-based solutions. They have to sign on the dotted line, it's required. And so when we think about how do we scale this solution, we prove it out, and then we think about what are all the levers for change. And if we get the engineers on board seeing how great it is, that'll make a difference as a practical matter. We want the regulators, we want the engineers, we want financing mechanisms. So we're thinking about that whole ball of wax.
Yeah.
Carlton Hunt asks, how do you balance preservation of freshwater wetlands behind historic dams and their substantial carbon sequestration role against the loss of the wetland when the dams are removed for fish migration, especially from the perspective of climate warming, water warming, and sea level rise? What does a cost-benefit analysis say if we're even thinking that along that line? That's a very, very complicated and interesting question.
That's another one where I'm going to have to give the most annoying answer, which is it really depends on the situation. It depends on the upstream wetlands and what their condition is. A lot of times, dams, just the creation of dams releases a massive amount of methane from the way that the kind of nutrient and sediment dynamics change when you put in a dam. Removing a dam can facilitate other wetlands. So it depends. There's no one size fits all answer. The really fun and sometimes challenging piece about nature-based solutions is because they're nature-based, they're really site-specific in a lot of cases. So I wish I had a here's your answer, but unfortunately it depends on the wetland and the dam and the project.
And I have to say that answer actually informs this idea when I'm thinking big about what are the levers, that's one of the engineering challenges, right? Is that very often, engineers have, a book they can open, they can say, okay, based on this and this is what you need to be successful in achieving this result. And with nature-based solutions, it's very specific. So when we've dealt with FEMA, for example, there's often been a rub with nature-based solutions because it is so site specific. And yet, unless we get FEMA on board, we're not scaling. We're not really going to ultimately address our infrastructure challenge in a way that meets the challenges of climate change and the need to really make sure that nature is part of the solution for our success long term. So Adina Masolansky says, I'm looking for a job in anything environmental. I have an associate's degree in art. I do volunteer during the spring, summer, and fall, and I do pick up trash in my neighborhood whenever I can. What do you suggest for the people who do not have a degree in environmental education, but still want to have a job in the environmental world? Well, it's great that Adina's on. Any advice?
So one, I think that part of it is, as an environmental field, we need to be better at not just looking for a degree, at looking for what skills do you have? I'm sure, I know that there's a ton of art skills and kind of being able to communicate visually about what we're doing. And volunteer work is work. Just because nobody paid you to do the work doesn't mean that it's not work. So it's relevant, transferable skills. So I think that on the you personally side, being able to understand, okay, what are my transferable skills? Okay, so art may sound like it's completely unrelated, but it totally is related. We need everybody to be working on the problems that we're facing. So can you help visualize the future? What do you want your role to look like? And then on the organizational side, I think all sorts of organizations need to get better at recognizing that. And I think that, I've seen conversations at TNC about how do we do this better. And I know that we need all of the skills that everybody has and is passionate about bringing. So I don't have kind of a clear here is your 10-step plan. But put your volunteer on your experience on your resume just as if it was a job. Nobody asks you. I guess some jobs ask you what you got paid for it, but volunteer work is work that you're doing because you care about it, even if nobody is asking you to do it. Like cleaning up trash is work. All of that is relevant and part of the solution and part of who you are. So best of luck. Feel free to reach out. We can chat too.
Let me also note that in Vermont, the Nature Conservancy just did a project with a couple of local artists to do installations in some of their preserves. So there's art in nature as an overlay. And, we have had a lot of conversation today about how we're not going to save the planet. We're not going to save the world unless we're able to communicate in a clear way that connects with people about the need for these kinds of solutions and the need to live differently in the world and to connect with nature differently. And, art is one way to be able to communicate. So I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't say it's either or, like if your passion's art, There have been artists who've engaged with environmental organizations to successfully communicate kind of the passion and feeling about the importance of nature. There's a question about what incentives exist or what funding mechanisms are being developed to provide the funding needed to encourage landowners to install the innovative septic systems.
That's what we're working on. That's kind of where some of the impact investing is going to come in, where we're working with a whole bunch of partners to answer that question, because that is a really key question. And if we can figure that out in places like Barnstable and elsewhere on the Cape, we can also help transfer those lessons, because if we get a really good funding model, then we can get these in the ground more. I know TNC has been doing a lot of this work with folks on Long Island as well, and we know that they've learned a lot of really important lessons. And we also know that there's some things that work really well on Long Island that aren't going to work as well on the Cape. There's just a lot of learning that we're about to get started. Now we're already started, that we will continue to do to figure this question out.
We have a really sweet question from Greg Thuat, a recent retired business executive and legacy member. Thank you for that. How can we get involved on a volunteer basis now that COVID is starting to wane? And that's very hopeful about COVID starting to wane. Are there ways for volunteers to get involved in any of this work?
Yeah, I think that depending on the way that you're interested in volunteering and the skills that you want to use in your volunteer role, there's a whole bunch of different options. So definitely reach out. I'll bet Deb or Liz or somebody could direct you to the right people, because I think that there's roles that I have for volunteers, but there's also tons of volunteer opportunities across the state for really cool projects that need extra hands.
Yeah, we have a whole stewardship team out in the western part of the state. And then we also have work in the office and, lots of, people helping with eradicating invasives or doing a whole bunch of things on Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard. So yeah, do contact us and we'll see if we can fit you with the kind of volunteer work you're looking for. So Emma, I wonder, what is your greatest hope for your work this year? So thinking about a year, not thinking that big 10 year, but this year, what are you looking forward to?
Ooh. So I am also hopeful that we will be doing some more things in person and that, to continue to really build those partnerships, because, I've been here since the Monday after Thanksgiving, so the very end of November. And so I've started to build relationships with our partners, but over the next year, really continuing to build those relationships with our partners, maybe identify and build new relationships with partners so that we can continue to vision the next step of the work. But that's something that, it's going to take time. And I really want to be like, yes, I have this all right now. Like, let's get this going. But, I know it's going to take time. I have to take a step back and take a deep breath. But yeah, I think that really continuing to build those partnerships and establishing my relationships, TNCs, but also mine as part of TNCs, both within and beyond TNC is what I'm most excited about.
Well, I personally can't wait to meet you in person. It's starting a new job during COVID, not the easiest thing ever. And you've done an amazing job. It's been such a pleasure. One quick last question. Somebody asked, so do you still get to play outside for your job?
I actually, even with the COVID restrictions that mean that we got to get approval and do all the attestation, I have gotten to go. No, thank you for that. I feel safe. I went on a beautiful 38 degrees and raining day. I went down to the Cape and got to meet some of our Cape partners. And then Allison, our director of science and strategy, and Jocelyn, our postdoc, and I took a lovely walk on the beach and the 38 degrees and raining. And then I've gotten to go out to Forbes Park a couple of times. So I do kind of get to play outside for work. I look forward to it. Also, not raining.
It'll be much more fun as it gets warmer. I'm looking forward to that too. One of the things we do in our chapter is especially when it gets warmer, is we get together for hikes as a chapter, so we can meet outside and spend some time in nature together, because it reconnects us with our passion and why we're doing this work. So we have come to the end of our time today. I just want to thank you again so much. And I want to thank everyone out there for joining us today. We really appreciate your support for the Nature Conservancy. It's your support, your contributions that makes all of this work possible. We're going to send you a follow-up email in the coming days with links to the resources we've talked about today and a recording of the webinar. And if you know somebody you think would enjoy it, please do forward it, share it with your friends. You can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with our work and to get updates on other virtual opportunities to connect with us. And please do join us next Thursday at noon for a conversation with Ruskin Hartley, the Executive Director of the International Dark Sky Association. As always, you can see our upcoming webinars and sign up at nature.org/MA webinars. And so I want to thank everyone again. I want to thank you again, Emma, for joining us today and sharing a little bit about you and your work. It's inspiring and it's so nice to have you. Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Deb.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye.